check some things just to see what kind of leakage and so on I'm getting. Let's hear the piano alone for a moment. Okay, fine. Fine, let's have the bass for a moment. Beautiful. Drums. The guitar, which I'm taking direct, so you don't have to be too loud out there.
Oh, I want to be loud.
You want to be loud, okay. Okay, that's fine.
Now, you want Stephen, you want an introduction today? We're talking with Chuck Day. None of that at all.
I'd like to get his name mentioned somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, I could dig it myself.
Okay, we're all set, Dave. You want to kick off?
There are as many different kinds of music as there are cuts of beef, I suppose, and they're all good for the appetite. And you talked a little bit earlier, Chuck Day, about Bill Haley and that era of music, and that calls to mind some of the basic rock era, or rock and roll, or rockabilly. Do you want to go back farther than Bill Haley?
Not particularly, no.
That's about the beginning of...
I don't want anybody to know I go back any further than Bill Haley.
What does rock mean to you? And somebody says rock, because it can mean a lot of different things to different people, depending on where you're at, as they say.
Rock music from the very beginning has had its ups and downs, and especially if you're speaking of popular rock music. In the beginning, it was very, very, very structured music, and the Bill Haley things, I think, were among some of the best of the very early rock and roll. And then, you know, it evolved through the Elvis Presley thing, which is really what got guitar rolling. It's the fact that Elvis played one. And how well he played or didn't play is not really the issue, but he had a great deal of influence on people picking up the guitar.
And the guitar was out front suddenly and,
Yeah.
and doing these big, heavy things, and in the background somewhere, or secondarily, there was a thing called the backbeat. Wasn't that part of rock?
Well, originally it was, you know, it came from the rhythm and blues and the big bands and that, you know, and that it was a 4/4 swing with a very hard backbeat, and there was none of the real da rock and roll sort of feeling. You know?
But the kids that were listening to rock and roll, that was the thing that they could tell it was their music, because it had the backbeat and it had the soaring guitar. This was before the time of the electronic music. I wonder if we could hear what you and the guys could do some in the area of some elementary rock and roll with that backbeat and the Bill Haley sound.
Let's skip.
Yeah.
Just a hard backbeat, you know.
In 4.
Yeah, and 4 swing, but a hard backbeat, and very little cymbal. And we'll just play a figure.
Okay. Down, 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 down.
No, more of a. The figure that I wanted to play was. Okay, let's do that. Okay. In G. One blues chorus. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's sort of the way it, you know, began that way.
Whatever gave the
Very simple, you know, very simplistic, but that it swung.
Whatever gave the guitar player the idea that he could step down front and start doing rock guitar?
The bigger the amplifier got, and the more pickups and sounds that you could bring out of a guitar made it more versatile. You know, I mean, originally the most anybody could do with a guitar was, you know, because you had like one pickup, and that was about as much sound as you could give. Was that sort of a sound, unless you were a jazz picker, and then you got that sort of sound, you know. But then they added pickups, and suddenly you could go, you know. And the guy said, "Hey, wait a minute! I can, some other things I can, you know."
And then, of course, you had, as a guitarist, you had the ability to walk all over the stage with a long cord plugged into an amplifier somewhere in the back.
There are also stories, though, of guys, that played outdoors and have walked into puddles.
And electrocuted themselves.
Yes, and fried themselves totally. So that's something that was a problem in the beginning, because the things they didn't really know what was going on, and a lot of amplifiers couldn't be grounded properly, and they just weren't aware that those things were necessary. And there were guys that got some pretty heavy shocks from stepping in a puddle while playing an outdoor concert, things like that.
Well, we remember Bill Haley as being one of the exponents of rock and roll, early rock and roll. Do you remember any of the other people and how they sounded back then?
Oh, sure. There were the Buddy Holly Crickets sort of guitar sound was one of the early Fender sounds. When Fender guitars, the solid body guitar, became more popular. The basic difference being that it's not as round a sound, it's a more trebly, tinny, flat sound. Maybe we can do a little bit of That'll Be the Day in A, in the key of A.
Now, this is the Buddy Holly sound.
This is the Buddy Holly Cricket sort of thing. Okay. And I'll start with that da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. 1, 2, 3.
Now we're in the middle 50s, or possibly the late 50s.
Late 50s.
And we suddenly turned a corner going into the 60s, and this was the beginning of, I guess, the Beatles and the electronic music. But this was still called rock, wasn't it?
There's one important influence that we're passing by, if we're going to pass through the 50s, and that's the Ventures. They have probably made more albums just playing their guitars than anyone else around.
Can we hear something of how the Ventures sounded as opposed to the Buddy Holly or the Elvis Presley or the Bill Haley?
Sure. Let's do a little Walk Don't Run. You know it too? No. Great. The bass player doesn't know it. That's the same pattern. Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, I suppose that's right. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. How did it sound to you guys?
Lovely.
Lovely?
I think we should explain, Chuck, that we pulled a little trickery here, and we did exactly what the kids were doing when they were making music, the Ventures, back in the 50s and the early 60s, in that you played two guitars, but not at the same time.
Right.
We had multiple track recording, and you put down the rhythm. And the piano player he didn't do anything. He listened, as we all did. And then you came back and re-recorded on top of the rhythm, the melody line.
Right.
And this suddenly opened a whole new field of electronic music, which still could be called rock or popular rock. Mm-hmm. And the Beatles started doing things, and other groups too, when they would stay in a studio for hours and just re-record and over-record.
That even goes to now.
Well, you can call it a trick, the multiple recording, if you want to, and I guess as long as everybody knows that it's a trick, it's like the magician, and you're just happy with the end product or the piece of cake that's made, because you know how it was done in the oven and so forth. What other tricks do you, as a guitar player, get involved with as far as rock is concerned? How do you make a rock sound?
Well, over the last 3 or 4 years, the wah-wah pedal has become very, very popular, plus other fuzz attachments, and certain things that to electronically enhance the instrument.
Well, what does the wah-wah pedal actually do?
Well, what it actually, it's a tonal thing. It changes the sound from a very low, flat, bassy sound to a very high-pitched treble sound. Let me do that. Okay, this is without any wah-wah. This is just this is an out-of-tune E chord. Okay? Now this is with the wah-wah, the same thing. You hear the wah.
And then there seemed to be a time when everybody was getting accustomed to playing with the electronic wah-wah pedals and the fuzz tones, and then it became almost as though, how much power do you have in your amplifier? And a lot of kids would get up on stage and turn it up as loud as they could, even to the point of where they would get distortion, that the amplifier couldn't carry the clear tone. And I was curious to know, Chuck, what you thought about that era, because everything you seem to play is so clear and is so pretty, even though it may have a lot of power behind it and a lot of intensity. It doesn't distort. What do you think of the time when they were distorting and you couldn't really tell what they were playing?
I think the distortion has its place. I don't think it's good as a constant or steady diet. I don't think you should play with the amplifier on 10 all the time. But I think there are times when you should turn it up and scream, because that's really what in that case, that's what you're trying to project.
Certainly some distortion in there.
What?
There's certainly some distortion in there.
I can't hear you. I've got a distortion in my ear.
A thought just came to me while watching you and the guys play that. The distortion feels and sounds like anguish or frustration, like trying to thread a needle with thread, and you'd keep trying.
Trying to thread a needle with a piece of rope.
And I wonder if that's what happened when the kids were getting the guitars and they were trying so hard and they wanted to play like their favorites and they just couldn't bring it off, so they turned it up louder and just... Because even your face got red, and the expression on your face was that of sheer frustration or anger almost. What do you feel when you play this distortion like that?
What I feel when I play distortion like that is, I'm venting my anger, and I'm letting it all out without any reservations or politeness or I'm no longer trying to please anyone. I'm trying to please me and trying to get myself off.
That's a form of honesty, isn't it?
I suppose.
Is there anything wrong with honesty in music?
No, it's necessary.
Is that the thing to strive for?
It's necessary. Otherwise, it's not really music. It's a product.
In the concept of modern music or rock, as we were talking, where we touched on the sound of bread. For instance, they even have a song called Guitar Man. And they have a very soaring, pretty sound that's come out of all the distortion we've talked about. Can you give us an example of how you would do that, how you'd make that sound, that pretty sound? Like you say, you call it
among
dessert.
musicians sometimes that is called a chicken rock.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of soft rock, I guess, is polite, but depends on who you are, what you are. Let's play A major 7 to B minor 7.
Okay.
It's like sort of tune. Make it 11th. That kind of thing, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Chuck, we've listened to and talked about the distortion sound, the electronic sound. We talked about the Beatles. Then we also talked a little bit about the very pretty sound, too. And we can also relate that to the Beatles. They started with I Want to Hold Your Hand and things like that. And then they did a very pretty thing like Michelle. Maybe this is why they were so popular, because they could do both.
And the versatility was one of the things that attracted me to their music, although I wasn't really attracted to their music until they'd been around for a few years. At first I was repelled, possibly because of their sudden popularity and all the girls like them. But later on, you know, I began to hear their music, and it's very good. And a lot of the early influence of the Beatles was Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry, as a matter of fact, has influenced most of us in one way or another.
How so?
Well, in that he was one of the early, I think, if not the only, early rock stars that played guitar and could actually play guitar. Most of them couldn't play. Most of them were rhythm players, and they weren't really into playing guitar, where Chuck Berry has been into playing guitar as well as singing and writing.
Can you do a little piece that would sound like Chuck Berry and not necessarily sound unlike the Beatles? In other words, would it sound like Chuck Berry and also a little bit like the Beatles, so we could hear both of these people involved in the same piece of music?
It's a tall order.
Well, you're a big guy.
Is that right on it, or start with the break?
I'll give you 3 with the break. 1, 2, 3.
I know the question is, or the answer is an elusive one to the question, where do you think music will go from this point?
Well, as I think I said before, I think it's going to get much looser. It's going to get much less structured. As far as instrumental music is concerned, it's going to get much less structured. And rock music, I believe, is going to be the blend of free jazz and rock and roll, in my opinion, is the coming thing. And I hope so, because that's what I really would like to play. My style of playing is a conglomeration of styles. At least that's sort of what I want it to be. I wouldn't want to be classified as a rock player. I wouldn't want to be classified as a jazz player or a country player or a classical player or anything. But I think I probably lean more towards blues and towards funk than any other style of music. Because to me, as it's always been, since I first discovered Bill Haley and the Comets, the groove has always been the important thing to me. And that was my first sort of influence, real strong influence in music, was Bill Haley and the Comets, because their music swung. And up to that time, all I'd heard was put another nickel in and Nickelodeon and all, and it just,
Okay, why don't we cut it right here?
We cut it right here.
Why don't we cut it right here?
I think we can cut it here.